All right, can you see and hear okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Happy to spend a little more time with you again today. Dwayne, you can start if you haven't already. So what I wanted to do was to start by, we're going to get into the topic of sprint planning today, and then we're going to talk about, we'll get into the daily scrum, we'll get into the sprint review and the sprint retrospective. So these, if you look through the any online literature, they may refer to these as ceremonies, but they've changed the names and they now call these events. So this is kind of where we transition in the training to these really important events that are part of the Scrum structure, the framework. And so I wanted to start out and just kind of lay the groundwork for these events and just kind of draw a picture of a sprint and show you where these events occur. And certainly we'll get into some detail on the sprint planning as that is our topic for the next 40 minutes or so. So what you see in front of you is a sprint. It's a 5-day, a 1-week sprint. The boxes representing each work day that the team will be working on the commitment to the sprint. And at the end of this sprint, of course, we expect to deliver value. Okay? We've talked about at the end of a sprint, we deliver what's called a potentially shippable product or minimally viable product or an increment, but it is value that we deliver to the stakeholders at the end of the sprint. All right, so let's start here in the beginning. And I like to say that these sprints are bookended by some important meetings on the front and on the back. Okay? And on the front side, we start with the sprint planning meeting. Okay, so we'll move the sprint planning over here, and this is the sprint planning meeting right here. Now the sprint planning meeting has really two parts to it. The first part is called the what, and the second part is called the how. Okay, so let's start with the what. Yesterday we spent quite a bit of time talking about roles, and we talked quite a bit about the product owner. And since the sprint planning meeting, the what section is all about what it is that we're going to deliver, this would be owned by the product owner. And the what section has two goals. The first is to actually declare a sprint goal. We like to have a sprint goal for every sprint. And the sprint goals should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. Now, last time that we taught this, there was quite a bit of discussion about attainable. You know, what it means to be attainable, and we had an example where we were, I think you probably did the exercise where you use story points to value some soup. And one individual asked the question, well, if we're going to do chicken soup and we need a chicken, what do we do if it takes 6 weeks to get a chicken and we have a 2-week sprint? You know, so this kind of comes to the question of attainable. We certainly want to make sure that when we have the sprint planning meeting and when we're doing the what part of it, we certainly want to make sure that whatever we commit to is attainable, okay? So the first part is to declare a sprint goal, should be those things. And the second part is, of this what meeting, is to determine which of these items in the product backlog should be brought over into the sprint backlog. So this example, we're going to pick 3 stories from the product backlog, bring that over to the sprint backlog. So those are the 2 goals for the sprint planning meeting, to define the goal for the sprint and to determine what it is that will be pulled from the product backlog into the sprint backlog.
Craig, can I just ask a question, going back
Yes,
to your point
yes.
about attainable and the example of the chicken?
Yes.
In that example, would you be creating another type of, was it story, the spike or something, which is about your analysis or preparation that would need to be done prior? Okay.
Yes, that's one good approach to handle that situation. But let me be clear that we would never commit to moving these stories from the product backlog to the sprint backlog unless they were attainable, unless we had commitment from the entire team, we can do this. Okay? So, as was suggested, that was a very good question, a good suggestion. We can create a spike story and say, well, we don't know how long it's going to take to get the chicken. We need to figure that out before we make our commitment. Perfectly good approach. Another one would be, you know, maybe we order this chicken ahead of time and we don't pull this from the backlog into the sprint backlog until it's ready, available, you know. So that's the point is that we should not pull it into the sprint backlog unless we're ready to go. We have what we need. The team has the individuals that they need, and we believe we can meet that commitment.